The hall was big, bigger than any building on Earth. The ceiling went so high that clouds formed near the top. The walls were made of something that looked like glass but was harder than stone. Thousands of seats filled the space, and in almost every seat sat a creature that was not human. There were tall ones with 4 arms. There were short ones with no eyes but 3 mouths. There were ones that floated in tanks of thick green liquid and spoke through machines. There were ones that looked like trees, slow and ancient and cold. 47 species, 47 civilizations, all of them gathered in one place, all of them staring at one woman. Her name was Sci-Fi. She was the last human ambassador to the galactic conclave. She stood at the center of the great floor alone in a simple dark uniform, no weapons, no guards. She carried only a small folder of papers that no one would ever read. Her face was calm. Her hands were still. The Velthari Archon spoke first. The Velthari were the oldest species in the conclave. They had been traveling the stars for 60,000 years. When they spoke, every other species listened. The Archon's voice came through the translation system as a low, smooth sound, like wind moving through stone halls. He said that humanity had caused enough damage. He said the Cathara incident had cost lives across 12 systems. He said that humanity was too young, too angry, too dangerous to sit among civilized beings. He said the vote had already been taken. The result was clear. 47 votes, 47 against humanity. The Quarantine Accord was now law. Earth and its 7 colonies would be cut off. No faster-than-light travel lanes would connect to human space. No trade ships would come. No communication would be allowed in or out. No human would be permitted to leave their systems. No human voice would be heard in the conclave again. They expected Sci-Fi to argue. They expected her to cry or shout or beg. Some of the species watched her with what might have been curiosity. Some watched with something that looked like pity. The Cathara delegation watched with open satisfaction. Their long, segmented bodies shifted and clicked quietly among themselves. Sci-Fi did not argue. She did not cry. She looked around the room slowly, her dark eyes moving from species to species, face to face. She did not look angry. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone who had just been given a very important piece of information and was filing it carefully away for later. Then she nodded once. She picked up her folder. She turned around. She walked out of the hall without a single word. The doors closed behind her with a sound like the end of something. Back on Earth, the broadcast went out within the hour. Every screen, every device, every public system carried the same message at the same time. It was not a speech from a president or a general. It was a simple statement, read in a calm voice, translated into every human language. It said, "The Galactic Conclave has closed the door to humanity. We will not knock again. We will build our own." That was all. No call to war. No tears, no long explanation, just those 2 sentences and then silence. People stood in streets and listened. Workers stopped in factories. Children stopped in schools. Farmers stood in their fields under alien suns on colony worlds and heard the words and looked up at the sky. Some people cried. Some people were angry. Some people sat down and stared at nothing for a long time. But most people, after a while, got back to work. Because that was what the message was really saying. Not that everything was over, but that everything was just beginning. The 7 colonies were Tarsis, Velt, Marath, Siren, Dusk Point, New Kavala, and the one simply called the Rock. Each one was different. Tarsis was warm and green. Velt was cold and windy. The Rock was exactly what it sounded like. But they were all human, and they all heard the same message. And they all understood it the same way. We are alone now, so we had better be enough. The conclave placed sensor buoys at the edge of human space. They were meant to watch for any attempt to leave, and to make sure no one entered. The buoys sent their signals back to conclave stations every few hours. For the first several years, the signals were ordinary. Human ships moving between colonies, energy readings from cities and farms, the normal, quiet noise of a civilization that was being very careful not to draw attention. Then slowly, the signals started to change. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, just small things. A new type of energy reading here, a frequency that didn't match any known human technology there. The analysts at the conclave stations logged the changes and sent reports. The reports went to senior stations, and then to the conclave councils, where they sat in queues with thousands of other reports about thousands of other worlds. Nobody read them closely. Why would they? Humanity was finished. Humanity was contained. The Cathara had been pushing for the quarantine for 30 years, and now they had it. The old problem was solved. There were newer, more interesting problems to deal with. And besides, what could humans possibly do? They were one species. They had 7 colonies. They had no allies, no trade, no resources from outside their own small bubble of space. They were like a fire that had been sealed in a box. Without air, fires die. That was what the conclave believed. That was the first and most important mistake they would ever make. Because humans were not a fire sealed in a box. They were the kind of people who, when locked in a box, started figuring out how to make the box bigger, and then how to make a better box, and then how to build something that didn't need a box at all. Asha Reyes lived for 30 more years after the day she walked out of that hall. She never spoke publicly about what happened, but she worked every day. She wrote, she taught, she helped plan, and before she died, she left behind one short sentence that would become the foundation of everything that followed. She wrote, "They gave us time. Do not waste a second of it." The years passed, then the decades. The first 30 years were the hardest. Without outside trade, some of the colonies ran short on certain materials. Tarsi's lost a lot of its heavy manufacturing for almost a decade. Velt had food shortages for 2 years. The Rock had it worst. It had always depended on imports for almost everything, and now there were no imports. The people of the Rock had to learn very quickly how to grow food in cold stone caves under artificial lights. They learned. That was the thing about the hard years. People learned. They had no choice but to learn, so they did. And when you learn something the hard way, under real pressure with real consequences, you learn it deeply. You learn it in a way that stays. By the time 30 years had passed, the 7 colonies were not suffering. They were not comfortable, not yet, but they were standing, and they were starting to look up. The scientists were the ones who moved fastest. Cut off from the conclave's vast libraries of shared knowledge, human researchers had to start from scratch on many problems. But starting from scratch sometimes means you find paths that no one else has walked. You ask questions that no one else thought to ask, because no one told you the answer was already known. In year 31, a team of 4 physicists on Morath figured out how to pull energy from the space between atoms. Not nuclear energy, not solar, something deeper than both. They called it zero-point extraction, and it worked. Not perfectly at first. The first machine was the size of a building and powered only a small town, but it worked. Within 15 years, the machines were the size of a car and powered a city. Within 40 years, they were the size of a fist and powered a colony. Energy stopped being a problem forever. With unlimited energy, everything else became possible. Ships could travel faster, factories could run longer, farms under artificial light could grow anything anywhere. The colonies grew. New ones were founded, not just 7 anymore. Then 12, then 20, then 40. The conclave buoys watched and reported. The readings were strange. The energy signatures didn't match anything in the known catalog. The new colonies appeared in systems that the conclave had mapped but never bothered to develop because they were too far, too difficult, too expensive to reach. For humans with their new engines and unlimited power, they were just neighbors. The reports kept coming. The conclave councils kept filing them away. The second great change came in year 75. It wasn't a technology, it was an idea, a philosophy written by a historian named David Osai on the colony of Siren. He called it the Rays Doctrine, named after the ambassador who had walked away in silence. The doctrine was simple. It said that humanity's goal was not to impress the galaxy, not to rejoin the conclave, not to prove anything to anyone. The goal was to build something so complete, so strong, and so good that the galaxy would eventually have to acknowledge it on humanity's terms alone. "We do not ask permission," Osei wrote. "We earn irrelevance." It became a motto. It was printed on school walls and carved above the doors of research buildings. Children grew up hearing it. It shaped the way people thought about their work. Not anger, not ambition for power, just quiet, relentless building. By year 120, humanity had settled more than 40 star systems. None of them were in conclave territory. They were in the space beyond the mapped edges, in the places no other species had bothered to go. Humans called it the uncharted reach. It was vast, it was rich, and it was entirely theirs. The old colonies became cities. The new systems became colonies. Everything grew: roads between stars, stations the size of small moons, schools that taught children born in one star system to talk easily with children born in another. In year 180, a young engineer named Suyon Park on New Kavala solved a problem that had stopped every known species in the galaxy cold. She figured out how to make ships that built other ships, not just automated factories, but true recursive construction. One ship could produce 10. 10 could produce 100. 100 could produce 1,000. The fleet could grow faster than any enemy could count. She was 26 years old when she solved it. She became the most important person in human history that almost no one outside human space would ever hear of. Year 240 brought the last great piece. A small team of researchers had been working for 60 years on a single problem. The conclave's FTL system used a network of lanes, built and maintained by the oldest species, controlled and taxed by the conclave itself. Humanity had no access to those lanes, so the team had been trying to find another way. They found it. They called it fold space compression. It had nothing to do with the lane network. It bent space itself briefly, like folding a piece of paper to bring two distant points together. You could go anywhere, instantly, without asking anyone for permission, without paying anyone a toll, without using a single lane that the conclave controlled. The first test jumped a ship from one end of human space to the other in less than a second. The crew on board said they felt nothing. Just one moment they were here, and the next they were there. In year 249, humanity went silent. Every signal stopped. Every frequency went dark. No transmissions, no noise, just nothing. The conclave buoys at the border reported total silence from human space and sent their reports. The analysts noted that the silence was unusual but not alarming. Some suggested humanity had finally collapsed. Most didn't think about it at all. 1 year later, everything changed. The message arrived everywhere at once. Not on the standard conclave communication bands, not through any of the lane relay systems. It arrived on a frequency that had no name in any conclave catalog, a frequency that, according to every theory of communication physics the conclave had, should not have been able to carry information at all. And yet there it was. Every species received it at the same moment. Council chambers, military stations, deep space listening posts, private ships floating in the middle of nowhere. The signal found them all. It was perfectly translated into every language simultaneously. Every word was clear. Every word was calm. It said to the galactic conclave, "This is the Terran Commonwealth. We have observed your 250 years of silence and found it adequate. We are no longer the species you quarantined. We control 61 star systems, 14 artificial stellar bodies, and a fleet you do not have the sensor range to count. We do not seek readmission to your conclave. We are establishing our own. You are invited to apply." Then it stopped. That was all. For a long moment, nothing happened anywhere. Across the galaxy, hundreds of species did the same thing at the same time. They sat very still, and they read the message again. And then they read it one more time. In the Velthari High Council chamber on Velthari Prime, the 11 oldest and most powerful beings in the known galaxy sat in complete silence for 11 hours. 11 hours. That had never happened in 60,000 years of recorded Velthari history. Advisors stood outside the chamber doors and waited, confused and afraid. No one dared knock. In the Cathara home system, the military high command immediately ordered a full sensor sweep of the old quarantine zone. The readings that came back made no sense. Earth's sun was there. The planets were there. But the sensor returns were wrong in ways that the technicians could not explain. Something was absorbing the scans. Something was giving back false data. The entire human home system had been wrapped in something that the Cathara had no name for and no counter to. A patrol ship was dispatched to the nearest edge of the old quarantine border. What they found there would be talked about for the rest of galactic history. The human ship was not what they expected. It was not the rough, industrial design of the old human vessels they had data on from 250 years ago. It was smooth. It was dark. It absorbed light in a way that made it hard to look at directly, and it was enormous. The Cathara patrol ship was a standard military vessel. By conclave standards, it was a large ship. It carried a crew of 800 and was considered combat-capable against most known threats. The human ship was the size of a moon. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. The sensor readings were checked 3 times. The human vessel was, in mass and volume, comparable to a small natural moon. It sat in space without moving, without signaling, without doing anything threatening at all. It simply existed, and its existence was enough. The Cathara patrol commander sent a message back to Home Command. The message was short. It said only, "We need to talk about what humanity has been doing." Back at Velthari Prime, the silence in the council chamber finally broke at hour 11. The Archon, the same one who had read the quarantine accord 250 years ago, his body now slower with age but his voice still smooth and low, said one sentence to his council. He said, "We made a mistake." None of them disagreed. Word spread fast. The smaller species in the conclave, the ones who had always been at the edges of power, the ones who had always been told to be quiet and follow the rules of the older civilizations, they heard the human message and felt something they had not felt in a very long time. Hope. 12 of them had already sent private messages to the Terran Commonwealth before the week was out. Station Rays was nothing like Velthari Prime. Velthari Prime had been built to impress. Everything about it was designed to make visitors feel small. The high ceilings, the grand halls, the ancient stone that had been mined from the oldest asteroid in the galaxy. It was beautiful in a cold way, a way that said, "We have been here longer than you, and we want you to remember that every second you stand in our hall." Station Rays was different. It was big because it had to be big, but it was built to work, not to impress. The corridors were wide and well lit. The meeting rooms had good chairs, simple tables, and clear windows that looked out at the stars. The air smelled clean. The temperature was comfortable for a broad range of species, because the engineers had simply asked the visiting delegations what temperature they preferred and then built systems to provide it. It was, in the words of one small species diplomat who had spent 30 years attending conclave meetings at Velthari Prime, the first place in the galaxy where I have ever been asked if I was comfortable. 12 species had already joined the Terran Commonwealth Conclave by the time the formal summit was called. Small species, mostly. ones who had been ignored or looked down on for centuries by the old powers. They had seen the human message, and they had seen what humanity had built, and they had thought, very carefully, about which future they wanted to be part of. They had chosen. The old conclave had no good options. They could ignore the Terran Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth had already drawn 12 of their members away, and more were asking questions. They could try to fight, but no one wanted to say that out loud after seeing the sensor readings of that moon-sized ship. They could negotiate. That was the only real choice left. And so the summit was called. Ambassador Lena Vasquez was the one who walked into the Velthari diplomatic chamber. She was tall, with the same dark eyes that appeared in every photograph of Asha Reyes. The resemblance was not a coincidence. The Reyes family had been at the center of human diplomacy for generations. Lena was Asha's great-great-great-granddaughter, and she had grown up reading her ancestors' private journals, studying her choices, learning from her silences. She entered the chamber without guards, without weapons, without anything except a small data core that she set on the table in front of her and left there without explanation. The Velthari Archon was not the same one who had spoken at the first accord. That one was long dead. This Archon was younger, only 20,000 years old, and he had spent his entire career managing situations that were difficult. He was good at it. He was good at making other parties feel that they were in a conversation between equals when, in reality, one side had more power than the other. He tried that now. He welcomed Ambassador Vasquez warmly. He said that the conclave was glad to see humanity return to the galactic community. He said that the past 250 years had been regrettable, but that old wounds could heal. He implied, without saying directly, that there was a path for humanity to rejoin the conclave and take a proper place within it. Lena Vasquez listened to all of it. She nodded politely. She waited for him to finish. Then she said quietly and clearly, "We didn't leave civilization. We outgrew yours." The chamber went very still. She continued. She did not raise her voice. She did not use complicated language. She explained, simply and directly, what the Terran Commonwealth was. 61 star systems, 14 artificial stellar bodies, each one built by human hands and human minds. A fleet that used technology no conclave species had yet developed independently. A population of 30 billion people spread across more space than any single species in the conclave controlled. Built entirely from scratch. Built in the dark. Built because they had no other choice, and because they had chosen to treat that lack of choice as a gift. The Cathara delegation tried to redirect the conversation. They brought up the original incident. They had a prepared version of events, polished and revised over 2.5 centuries, that placed most of the blame elsewhere. They had used this version successfully at dozens of conclave proceedings over the years. Lena Vasquez pointed to the data core on the table. She said that the core contained 250 years of Commonwealth historical record. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence humanity had collected, archived, and verified. The Cathara incident was in there. All of it, not a version, the thing itself. "We remembered everything," she said. "We simply waited for the right moment to say so." The Cathara had no response to that. The rest of the summit moved quickly after that, not because everything was resolved, but because everyone in the room understood, clearly and without further argument, what the shape of the future was going to be. The Terran Commonwealth was real. It was not going away. It was not asking for permission. It was, if anything, doing the old conclave a small kindness by inviting them to be part of what came next instead of simply proceeding without them. When Lena Vasquez left the chamber, she did not look back. The 6 years that followed changed everything. Not in a violent way, not with great battles or burning fleets. The change was the kind that comes when one way of doing things is simply replaced by a better one, and the old way slowly stops being used until one day everyone realizes it is already gone. The first thing that changed was travel. Humanity opened the fold space compression technology to all member species of the Terran Commonwealth Conclave. Not sold, not licensed, given, free of cost, free of conditions, free of anything except the basic requirements of Commonwealth membership. Travel times across the galaxy collapsed. A journey that had once taken years by lane relay could now be done in hours. Trade that had been too expensive to bother with became easy. Species that had never met suddenly had reasons to talk. The old Conclave's lane network, which had been its greatest source of power and income for thousands of years, became less important almost overnight. Not useless, but no longer the only way. No longer the thing that gave the old powers their grip on everyone else. The second thing that changed was harder to see but more important. When humanity offered the 12 small species free access to FTL travel, they also offered something else. Better versions of many technologies the old Conclave had been selling to those species for centuries, at high prices, with conditions attached. Human engineers had spent 80 years quietly studying every known Conclave technology and then improving it. The improvements were real. They were not small. And humanity handed them over without asking for anything in return, except a seat at the table. The old powers could not compete with free. The third change was the one no one had predicted. Humanity chose not to punish the Cathara. It would have been easy. The data core that Lena Vasquez had placed on the table at the summit contained enough evidence to destroy the Cathara's reputation in the Conclave permanently. It contained proof of what had really started the incident 250 years ago, proof that the Cathara had lied, proof that the quarantine had been built on a false story. Humanity released all of it. But instead of using it to humiliate the Cathara, the Commonwealth proposed something called the Restorative Framework. The Cathara would acknowledge what they had done. They would fund reparations to the species most harmed by the original incident. They would be part of a formal historical correction, public and permanent. No one would be executed. No territory would be seized. No species would be destroyed. Just truth and consequences that matched the truth. The galaxy watched this happen with something close to disbelief. The species that the Conclave had called too violent, too dangerous to exist among civilized beings, had just done something that none of the older civilizations had managed in 60,000 years of shared history. They had chosen justice over revenge. In year 6 after the summit, the Vilthari sent a formal request. They wished to be admitted to the Terran Commonwealth Conclave as an observer state, not a full member, not with voting rights, just present, just watching. The request was considered carefully. Conditions were set. The Vilthari accepted them. Ambassador Lena Vasquez stood at the viewport of Station Reyes on the night the Vilthari agreement was signed. The stars outside were thick and bright. Somewhere out there, 61 systems carried human cities, human farms, human schools, human laughter. 30 billion people who had been born into a civilization that had built itself from nothing in the dark and had never once stopped moving forward. On the wall beside her hung a photograph. A woman in a dark uniform, standing alone in the center of a great hall, surrounded by 47 alien species. The woman's face was calm. Her hands were still. She was looking at the camera like she already knew something no one else in the room had figured out yet. Lena looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she said quietly to no one in particular, "You didn't beg them, grandmother. You gave us time. We used every second of it." Her aide appeared at the door and told her that 6 more species had submitted applications to join the Commonwealth overnight. She nodded. She turned back to the stars. She was not surprised. The galaxy had taken 250 years to understand what a Sha-Rays had understood the moment she walked out of that hall in silence. The stars did not belong to the ones who had been there longest. They belonged to the ones who kept building, kept learning, kept choosing to move forward no matter what door was closed in their face. Humanity had been